All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of React Roundup. I am TJ Van Tol, and with me today on the panel, we have Paige Niedringhouse.
Hey, everybody.
And Jack Harrington.
Hello.
And our special guest today is Evyatar Alush. Evyatar, why don't you say hi to everybody? Tell people what you do, why you're famous, all those good sorts of things.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. So I'm Evyatar. I'm a front-end engineer at Facebook, mostly working on open source libraries during my free time. One of those is Vest, which I want to be talking about today. Apart from that, in my free time, I volunteer in a local tech community that introduces new developers to their first open source contributions, which is pretty cool.
When I went freelance, I was still only a few years into my development career. My first contract, I was paid $60 an hour. Due to feedback from my friends, I raised it to $120 an hour on the next contract. And due to the podcasts I was involved in and the screencasts I had made in the past, I started getting calls from people I'd never even heard of who wanted me to do development work for them because I had done that kind of work or talked about or demonstrated that kind of work in the videos and podcasts that I was making. Within a year, I was able to more than double my freelancing rates, and I had more work than I could handle. If you're thinking about freelancing or have a profitable but not busy or fulfilling freelance practice, let me show you how to do it in my Dev Heroes Accelerator. Dev Heroes aren't just people who devs admire, they're also people who deliver for clients who know, like, and trust them. Let me help you double your income and fill your slowdowns. You can learn more at devheroesaccelerator.com.
Very fun. Well, so there's a lot we want to talk about, but maybe we could just start with Vest. So maybe you could start by just giving an introduction to people that haven't heard from it, what it is, what it does, all that good sort of stuff.
So yeah, Vest is an open source validations framework. So form validation framework. Most of us have dealt as open source, as front-end developers with form validation during our career, and it's never been easy. It gets better with new APIs and new libraries, but I think it always ends up being frustrating both to new and experienced developers when they meet some corner cases. And working on Vest, I tried to take some new approach, which is take a familiar pattern that people already know and already use, which is the pattern of unit testing frameworks such as Mocha or Jest, so hence the name Vest, validation test, and basically try to convert it and transform it to the world of form validations. So as you would write your testing suite in Jest, you could write your form validations in a similar suite that holds all your validation data, but not your form data. This is not a form state library, but a validation state library. So this is a big distinction from all the rest.
Yeah, no, this is interesting stuff. It blows my mind a little bit because I've been writing form validation since like the old Internet Explorer days, and I haven't seen an approach truly like this. I imagine some of this, like, does it make unit testing then your validation? Like, because it's almost like your code you write to actually create the validations, almost like our unit tests. So then do you then unit test those presumably as well? Does it make it easier to write those?
So yeah, one of the main benefits you get from Vest is that you have this very clear contract between how you write your validations and how your feature behaves. And this makes it really easy to also unit test that. So one question many people ask me is, do you run this in production? Unit tests are not supposed to be run in production. So no, even though internally it is built very much like a unit testing framework, it is not a unit testing framework, but you can write unit tests for what you do in Vest. And more specifically, it makes it really easy because you don't have to deal just with all the integrations and key presses and blurs and whatever. You just insert some data and you validate what comes out, or you test what comes out. So it makes it really easy to just test your validation logic. And I'm always confused between testing and validation because it's pretty much the same to me.
Yeah, I was going to ask, how does this work with Formic or React Hook Form or one of those?
So yeah, React Hook Form is an excellent library. I've never dealt with Formic actually, but React Hook Form is an excellent form state management library. And they actually have a resolver for Vest. So about 6 months ago, the author of Hook Form approached me and asked me if they could write a resolver for Vest, and they did. And so many of the people who actually use Vest come through the form through the hook form website. Other than that, you can basically hook it to whatever form validation or form state library that handles some external outputs. I believe that Formic does as well.
I haven't seen resolvers when it comes to React Hook Form. How does that work? So do you like initialize it with a resolver that then points to Vest? Okay.
So yes, so basically they have a completely different repository that has all those integration that they wrote to Yup and Vest and Zod and many others. And basically you can initialize your hook form with one of those resolvers, and then you can approach some other method of validation because hook form is very basic in terms of what it gives you. And the others tend to give you a lot more. If you are more interested in schema validation, for example, you could use Yup or Zod. And if you're more interested in a suite-based approach, which is only Vest at the moment, you could use Vest.
Very cool. And so how does this work when it comes to it sounds like it would be ideal for validating the relationships between data. Like, hey, if this is set, this also has to be set. And is that what you're targeting, kind of exposing that to make it more easy to understand?
So maybe we should first describe the different approaches to form validation in general. And sure. The way I see it, we have three different approaches. We have the rule-based approach or the metrics approach, which is basically a function that returns you whether a field has some kind of value. For example, is a valid email or is a number or whatever it is. And there are numerous libraries for it, such as Validator.js, which are the best at this, I think. Then you have the second kind of form validation libraries, which are schema validation libraries, such as Yup or Zod or many others, that basically take a schema and try to validate your data set matches this schema. And this gives you a lot of flexibility, but it also adds a lot of constraint because it doesn't deal with interactions. It doesn't deal with optional fields very easily. You have to manually set whatever it is that you want to do. And then there's the third type, which is a UI first form validation library, or basically a form state management library such as Formic or Hookform and many others that handle the state for you, but it comes with a cost. And the cost is they usually manage either the interaction you have. So you have to put something on your elements and then they give you back the results of the data. So they control the event handlers, or otherwise they have their own components that you have to use inside your form, which means that it's going to be hard to migrate to a new library. For example, if I want to migrate from Angular to React, say. And Vest takes a completely different approach from all of these. It gives you the comfort state form validation libraries without being tied to one specific framework or another, but it still gives you all the flexibility you would get in schema validation or else. Because what it does, it takes your data and you specify which field has changed. That's all you have to specify. And internally, Vest just calculates which fields need to be validated, and it appends it to your validation state. And what you get back is a validation state that you could use in any way you want, in any framework you want, even if you do it on Node or React or Angular or whatever. So this is the main difference. And this, I think, pretty much sums up the answer to your question.
Very cool.
So this is then not framework specific at all then, since you're just adding validation. So you could use this with Angular, with Vue, with whatever, correct?
Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
Angular? What are you talking about Angular on the React Roundup podcast for?
Yeah. What about, I'm curious, what about like validations? Do you tackle like server versus client validations at all in your library? Is Vest specifically for the client? How do you approach that?
So when I first started working on Vest, it was actually named differently. It was Passable, and I was working on it when I worked at Fiverr.com. And my initial idea was we have to have a way to handle validations in a way that's shared between the browser and the server, because at the moment it was unmanageable. We were getting bugs from all over the place because somebody changed the field in the client and they forgot to add it in the server and stuff like that. And I came up with this as an initial solution to working with validations both on the server and the client. So yes, whatever runs JavaScript can run Vest. There are different distinctions that you have to make because Vest itself is stateful. It doesn't use a React state, but an internal state that has your validation state at the moment. So for example, you cannot persist that state in the server because then you would get like collision between users and memory and data leak. But other than that, when you keep this in mind and handle it correctly, it works exactly the same both in the server and the client.
Very cool. So how did you go about starting to build this? Did you start building it in JavaScript, in TypeScript, in something else entirely? What was the initial approach, I guess?
I started working on Vest in vanilla JavaScript. It was, I think, 2017. And so I started working on Vest back in 2017, just in plain vanilla JavaScript. But I was always having to, and I kept the types written manually and separated for hints and for users who actually use TypeScript. And it was getting very tedious, and I would get like very subtle bugs every now and then that were just annoying to handle with because I had to keep track manually of what type everything returns, and I had to do it like manually. And a couple months ago, I decided that I'm done with it, and I started working on a new version of Vest, which is written completely in TypeScript. It's a monorepo of different packages that compose Vest. The user doesn't have to install all of those. They have to just install Vest and everything comes together. And it was a really, really hard process. I almost gave up, like, I think 4 times working on it. But now it's starting getting useful because all the types are in place. Everything is working. And I still have to maintain the types for all the versions of TypeScript because the current version of TypeScript has some features that are very useful for what I do in Vest. But other than that, it's looking good.
Nice. So is this your first time making, I guess, an NPM package or a library for other people to use?
So I maintain quite a few packages. A few of them are actually React components. I have an emoji picker and a toast notification library that have their decent amount of users. Vest is not my most used package, even though it's my most loved package. It is not my first package that I've been working on, but it is one that What?
You're not supposed to have a favorite package. You're supposed to love them all equally.
Yeah, I've given way less love to my emoji picker, but somehow it grew to thousands of consumers. Yes,
sad emoji.
But people love emoji pickers, so it just works for other people. But so no, Vest is not the first package that I've been working on, and not the first package that I've been publishing. But it did teach me a lot about writing interfaces for other developers.
Yeah, that's what I was a little bit curious about. Is I've only been on the consumer side of downloading libraries and packages, but I've never actually had to make one or maintain one. And I was wondering, what kind of issues do you encounter as a library maker, or what kind of, I guess, where do you even get started learning how to do that?
A lot of trial and error. Basically, I found myself banging my head against the wall several times a week, trying to figure out how to work with stuff and how to make stuff happen. The most frustrating thing I've encountered recently is the exports API in package.json. I just can't figure it out. Maybe someone in the audience will come and help me. But this is usually a matter of trial and error, getting things right and playing with the interface. Now, it has two different issues working on packages for other consumers, because there's the technical side, which you can eventually figure out reading enough docs or hacking it around. But there is the other side that's more dangerous and more difficult, which is basically the API design and what you do for the users. Because once you add something and make it production, you can't remove it easily. You have to keep it forever and you have to maintain it. So you can't just add new features or new functions or new interfaces for people to use. if you're not 100% sure about them. And one of the features that I was trying to add to Vest, which is a simple question, is valid, took me 4 years to get right. Yes, it took me 4 years to get right because apparently is valid is not the negation of is invalid. A form could be invalid because it's not filled yet, but it doesn't mean that it's not valid and you should highlight everything in red. So it took me a lot of time to get this one right, especially when you deal with async validations. Stuff that come from the server or fields that the user hasn't interacted with yet. So you have to be very careful when adding new interfaces to your packages. And this is the most important thing, I think.
It's funny that you say that because I've just recently I encountered that on, I think, some website that I was registering for. I hadn't filled in my email address yet, and it was already giving me the red bar saying that it needed a valid email. So how did you address that for, forms that hadn't been filled out, that a user hadn't even begun working in, to not show them those kinds of error messages?
So I do two things. And the most basic use case is you don't have to care about it. So you only highlight fields that the user has interacted with so far. But there's a problem because if the user wants to know if the form in its entirety is valid or invalid, there's a problem because you cannot ask about each and every one of the field if it's valid, because most of them won't be if the user hasn't interacted them with yet. So what I had to do is mostly flip the obvious. Most form validation libraries, and usually as we think about form validation libraries and forms in general, we treat fields as optional unless specifically required. And just by flipping this default and saying everything expressed within Vest is required, and you have to say what is optional whenever you initialize your suite. If you have something that's optional, you don't have to. Most don't. But if you have something that's optional whenever you initialize the suite, I can very easily know whether the form in its entirety is valid or not. Because even if something hasn't been interacted with, I can very easily go to, is it required? Okay. If it's required, the form is probably not valid yet. The other fields, no, they haven't been interacted with yet.
So one other question I have is, since you spent a lot of time in the form space, forms in general are something that a lot of developers, myself included, struggle with. I'm curious, if you have any common mistakes that you see people make with forms that you'd like to point out, for our listeners, things they might be doing or recommendations you might have around form validation, because all of us fill out online forms. All of us are frustrated by it. What are some of your pet peeves that you want people to be more aware of?
So the most obvious one, and this is not a user experience one, but just a security one, please don't just validate in the client, also validate on the server. If you have to do one, validate on the server. That's the most important one. Don't use Vest, don't do anything, just validate on the server, please. So this is
it might be worth explaining why for any beginners listening to this that might not know.
Definitely. So what we have are usually two kinds of validations. We have form validations on the server and we have them on the client. Now, on the client, we usually do form validation for user experience. We want the user to know they're doing something wrong before they click submit and get a response from the server, so they can fix it and don't have to wait. But when you validate on the server, it is for your own security. It's for integrity of the data. It's so people don't inject any bad stuff into your database. And so stuff don't break on your machine or on your server. So if you have to validate something, of course, you should validate both because user experience matters. But the first one to think about is validate on the server. This is really, really important and cannot be stressed enough.
You mentioned monorepos and how you're working with it in your project. Is that how you would get your validation synchronized between the client and the server? Because you'd want to use the same code base. You'd want to have the same validations applied to both. So is that a good way to do that, to share that code?
This could be a good way to share the code. I've seen people use Vest with NPM packages of their own, so they share the validation. Although this can be really tricky to keep up to date as well because you have to bump versions on both places. People who use the same server, both as their application server and their server-side server, basically both their front end and the back end, usually have the same code base. For example, on Next.js, they can share the same bundle or bundle with the same validations from the same server, which is very easy to use. And sometimes a monorepo is very easy to use as well because you have both your server code and the client code shared on the same place. And usually, if you're on a large company, you may have different teams using the same validation on different pages. For example, I want to be using the same email validation on multiple pages of the site because I want to be using it on the password reset and on the login and on the sign up, for example. So I have to be using it on different places of the site. So a monorepo is a good solution for all of those.
Are you ready for core web vitals? Fortunately, Raygun can help. These modern performance metrics play an important role in determining the health of your website, which is why Raygun has baked them directly into their real user monitoring tools. Now you can see your core web vital scores are trending across your entire website in real time and drill into individual pages to focus your efforts on the biggest performance gains. Unlike traditional tools, Raygun surfaces real user data, not synthetic, giving you greater insights and control. Filter your score by time frame, browser, device, geolocation, whatever matters to you most. And what makes Raygun truly unique is the level of detail they provide so you can take action. Quickly identify and resolve front-end performance issues with full waterfall breakdowns, user session data, instance-level diagnostics of every page request, and a whole lot more. Visit Raygun.com today and take control of your core web vitals. Plans start from as little as $8 per month. That's Raygun.com for your free 14-day trial.
Yeah, I know previous jobs I've worked at, some of the challenges has been we didn't have an all JavaScript stack. The back end was Java or C# or God knows what. And it definitely was a struggle to keep the validation in sync, both in terms of the validations themselves, but also like the error messages, like figuring out like what is the Java developer going to pass back? How am I going to show it and such? And I don't know if I have a great recommendation or answer because I don't think I've ever arrived at something I was happy with using. I don't know if you have any experience with that, where like the back end is like in a completely different technology, and if you've ever found anything that worked for you in those sorts of situations.
Yes, actually, I think this is a real problem for many people who write JavaScript because they have to use their validations and they don't want to be maintaining the validations twice. And one solution I've seen, I don't know if I completely recommend it, but I see its benefits, is having a Node.js or JavaScript-based validation server on your premise or on your basically somewhere around your services. And whenever any request comes to your server, they first of all go and route it to the validation server and check whether this is okay or not okay. And then it gets back the response. Now, since the users, it should take only a couple of milliseconds on normal environments and to this round trip from your application server to the VEST server or validation server. And the user would get the response pretty quickly. And usually you would only do it and submit, and the user already expects it to take a couple of seconds. So this is okay.
That's actually kind of clever because I could see the people on the backend servers kind of liking that approach as well, because then they could almost write their code assuming the data is valid at that point. So it's very interesting.
One thing I know for sure is if it's Java, you're going to get a 200 back regardless of what you put out there, but it's going to have in there, result equals error. It's like, that's not a 200. I hate it when they give me back a 200 like fake, psych.
Oh, those are my favorite APIs by far.
So you mentioned you had some issues going over to TypeScript. Talk to us about that, because I'm a huge TypeScript fan. I'm just kind of curious what blocked you.
Yeah, so TypeScript works pretty well for basically everything, but usually when writing an app, but when you try writing a library in TypeScript, you have many things to expect that you don't have control over. And you have to imagine what types the user would put in, and you have to imagine how users would use your library. And when working on VEST, I got into a big mess of gnarly generics because everything here is dynamic, for example. And I didn't tell much about the API behind VEST, But as I mentioned, we have a validation suite and we have a validation test, and we have our assertions, which are similar to like expect in unit tests. So we have enforce, and enforce takes a value, and then you can chain assertions to it infinitely. So you can enforce, for example, the number 1, and then that it is a number, and that it's lower than 10, and that it is not an array, and that it's not a string. For example, this doesn't make any sense, but you could do this forever. And to make this kind of chainability within TypeScript, when you don't know whatever the user is going to put there, and when they are able to extend it with their own matchers and their own enforcements, it's very hard to achieve. And this was the main problem for me.
I can imagine. Yeah, absolutely. Did you actually go and take a look at like the Mocha typing, just because like how'd they do it? I don't know. And look through their stuff.
So no, I did not take a look. So I did not take a look at the Mocha typing or Jest typing, because most of them don't allow infinite chaining, which I do for API reasons and for brevity for the users, because everything they put in has to be concise and small, because I care about bundle sizes. And so I did not take a look at how they do it, but it really, really was terrible to figure out how to do it. Maybe I should share the code with you, and you will see what it was like working on it.
Yeah, you can share it, and we can make sure to throw it in the show notes so people listening can refer to it and check it out as well.
Get a primer on TypeScript generics.
So how has it been since you've made this library, actually getting it out to users to try it and tell you what they think of it? Because I think feedback is probably one of the most difficult things sometimes to get after you've built something.
Yes, definitely. And this is a pain point. But so one of the fears of first releasing open source code is that people are going to make fun of you and laugh at you. But the reality is that nobody looks at it and nobody knows and nobody cares. And you have to work really hard for people to notice it. So this was my main takeaway. If you write your open source library, don't stop pushing it. Don't stop mentioning it. Just lurk on Twitter, create your own custom filters. And whenever somebody says the word validation, just storm over there and send links. Yes, this is something I've done, and a bit ashamed of it, but not completely. And one day I even tagged Ken C. Dodds, and I said, because this is essentially a unit testing like framework, and I said, testing people, what do you think? And that was, I think, the first break that Vest had, and he just tweeted interesting and shared my tweet. And that's it. Then the same day, from 90 stars, I went up to, I think, 500. Yeah. So if I have one recommendation for people working on open source and getting out there, is don't stop. Just keep pushing it, because it's really hard. There is an abundance of libraries and frameworks out there, and people just don't have the time, and people don't have the attention. And if you're not working on it and make it your primary goal to make it public, then it will just not get noticed.
Yes,
yeah,
developers.
Yeah, consistency is key. Oh, sorry.
And developers say they hate marketing, but I mean, it's what you got to do, right? Like those are like traditional marketing tactics.
Yeah, it's just part of the game, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it. The big libraries that have thousands of GitHub stars, it's not because they didn't say anything. It's because they were out there solving the problem, and enough people started to take notice that they really took off. But it's definitely something that I look at when I'm evaluating solutions that I want to use, is how many other people either have downloaded it from NPM or have started on GitHub as something that they would, use and come back to and use again and again.
Yeah, relentless self-promotion is key.
Well, I have to imagine, especially like the form space, like there are a lot of existing solutions out there, right? So it's an especially crowded market to try to break into. I will say you have an awesome logo. Is there a fun story behind the logo where that came from?
So I just created it with Illustrator. I played with it until I got it right. I had an idea of taking the letter V and combining it somehow into a vest, which is what I did. And thank you for, by the way, you're the first person who says it's a nice logo. Nobody ever commented on that.
Oh, it's really pretty.
Thank you. But other than that, there was one main goal I had while working on this logo is keep the 3 dots or the 3 buttons on the vest, because this is the only reference I have to the Jest logo. If you'll see the clown shoe they have there are 3 dots, and I had to keep those as well because again this is vest similar to Jest.
Oh, so is the name itself based off of Jest as well? Is that where it came from?
Yes. If Jest is for JavaScript tests, this is for validation tests.
Oh, okay. I like it.
So one thing is interesting when you think about how open source projects get out there and get popular. A lot of it is in Stack Overflow and articles and things like that, and also on GitHub repos and when people use it. And Copilot has been mining all that. And that's one of the things that interests me about Copilot is if Copilot is actually going to kind of stall out new open source projects because it's not going to recommend patterns for those new things. It's only going to recommend the patterns that it has for the older stuff. So I know you've been using Copilot a lot. Have you thought about Copilot in that context with your stuff?
So I can see what you say because I've been playing with Copilot quite a lot in the past couple of weeks since it came out. And I see the problem that it is solving or what it does efficiently. There are many things it still doesn't do very efficiently. And just to describe how I use Copilot, I mostly use it for writing unit tests, which is an amazing job for Copilot because you describe what you want to happen. And it already has access to your repo and your code, and it knows how your repo works, especially if you have types inside. So it already knows everything about it. And it just generates the correct tests, or with slight modifications, these are the correct tests. And usually it just generates like a whole suite of tests for me within seconds instead of minutes. And in terms of writing new patterns and coming up with new patterns, it didn't change the way I write my code. The only thing it did is complete me when I was doing repetitive tasks or adding stuff into my existing code. And I can see what you say about installing new open source libraries. And I think it is not a safe tool for new developers, mostly because of that. It comes with good recommendations sometimes, but sometimes it is just nonsensical. And if you cannot distinguish if it's doing something good or doing something bad, you should probably not be using it because it does add stuff to your code base and sometimes it's just not good enough.
That's one of the things I mentioned in a video that I did on GitHub Copilot was there's a line or a maxim, I guess, in the Pragmatic Programmer from Dave Thomas, which is don't ship code you don't understand. And I think that's one of the things about Copilot is it's wonderful. But at the end of the day, it's writing code for you and it's going to be in prod. And you can't really point at Copilot and be like, hey, that's the one that wrote the bug. It wasn't me. It's like, no. It's on you. You checked it in. So yeah, it's fine to get recommendations from Copilot, but make sure that you actually go through it and understand it about what it actually wrote for you.
One thing I wish Copilot did when I've tried it is it doesn't give you much context for like where, because there have been times where like I've used Copilot and said like, oh, what suggestions do you have for me? And I find one of them interesting, but I kind of want to see more like, oh, like that's an interesting approach, but I'm curious how, like, what the code looks like above and below. But Copilot doesn't expose any of that. So like, for all you know, like it came from random internet locations. So you don't have like the context you'd have like in a Stack Overflow post. Usually you'd see like some explanation of it and like maybe some comments below it. But it's just like, here's a regular expression, like good luck sort of deal, which maybe it'll evolve over time because I could almost see, I mean, given the structure they have, it could start to like, they could start to allow you to perhaps like comment on things or link to things or have discussions. Like there's There's a lot of potential there.
So the only thing, or the way I've been using Copilot, and I think it works well when doing it, is when you have like a very narrow context in which you get to work with it or tell it what to do. So if you write a unit test, you describe exactly what you want to happen. Or when you write a code comment or start a new function and you describe exactly what it should do, then it does the correct thing, usually when it has enough context. But other than that, with you.
Yeah, I use it for getting auto suggestions as I'm creating components, right? When I've got an interface of I'm going to get, this list of people or whatever, and I've already got that. And then I start typing use state and it's like, okay, you are going to want a list of people, and it automatically populates that for me. And then, you're going to want to do a fetch on that. So, I type in use effect and it automatically starts like filling out a fetch for me, which is actually really cool and really it accelerates me a lot. But again, I still have to understand. I'm the pilot. I'm the one who understands like where we're going to go on this trip, right? Going from point A to point B. And it's the co-pilots that's helping me along that way, but it's not actually, it's not going to go and do stuff unless I want it to. So that's really the important part to understand around Copilot. There's a lot of cool use cases though.
Yeah. So did Copilot end up fixing your TypeScript issues? Did you just go into your TypeScript config and just say like, I need chainable generics, and that spits it out? There you go.
No, unfortunately, I had to deal with this stuff myself. I wish it could, though. Maybe on the next iteration.
Yeah, that's probably a little ways down the line still, but similar to all of you, I've enjoyed it, but at the same time, it can't know all the other logic or all the kind of mental model that you've made up in your head of how you want things to go. So useful, but at the end of the day, like Jack said, it's still up to you to say this code is doing what I expect it to. We can't completely depend on Copilot for that.
So last question to shift gears just a little bit, just because I'm curious with maintaining open source projects like this, like Vest. When we speak to a lot of open source maintainers, a common theme is, it's a lot of work. You said you're doing a lot of this in your free time and such. I'm curious, what keeps you motivated to keep working in the open source world? Do you have to deal with like a lot of like bogus PRs, issues, things like that? Like what's giving you enjoyment to keep working on this?
So I started working on the previous version of Vest, Passable, when I was working for a company, for Fiverr. And then it was part of work. So I came up with this framework to get stuff working on Fiverr. And when I left Fiverr, it was like, okay, I actually like this project. This is a really cool project. And working on it is my opportunity also to test a lot of my new ideas. So I wanted to play with TypeScript and learn how to work with generics. So I started writing Vest in TypeScript and create some crazy generics for it. I wanted to learn how to write my own monorepo tool and utility, not for anyone else to use, but just for myself. So I started working on it, and currently Vest works with my own tool. And every something new I come up with, I somehow add to this repo or to this project specifically. So what keeps me motivated is basically I enjoy it. It's really fun working on it. I don't get many bogus PRs. I actually get pretty good PRs from people, usually with recommendations or suggestions or feature requests. Some of them don't understand the way Vest should or does work or the philosophy behind Vest, but most of them are pretty decent from people who want to be using Vest correctly, and I really enjoy their feedback because this is the first information I get from real users, not in a company I've been working at.
Very cool and good to hear. Always like to see positivity in the open source community and good examples of that for sure.
Yeah, it could be harsh.
Well, this has been a lot of fun, Evyatar. Are there any topics we haven't gotten to, or are there any other questions on the panel? Anything we've missed? Sounds like no. So why don't we go ahead and segue into our picks?
Hey, folks, if you love this podcast and would like to support the show, or if you wish you could listen without the sponsorship messages, then you're in luck. We're setting up new premium podcast feeds where you can get all of the episodes released after Christmas 2020 without the ads. Signing up will help us pay for editing and production, and you can go sign up at devchat.tv/premium.
Paige, do you want to kick us off?
I would be happy to kick us off. So My pick for this week is going to be a site called Pipedream. I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but I just came across it earlier this week, actually. And the premise of it is a low code way to connect different APIs or different website APIs. So, for instance, one thing that I've been trying to do lately is connect to a discourse API and actually get things from the reports that it has. So it generates these really nice reports if you're logged in, but you can also get a JSON version of any of these reports to, pipe through to maybe an analytics tool or send on a cron job or anything like that. So when I was looking into possible ways to get this data out of discourse, Pipedream came across as a really user-friendly way to be able to connect, my discourse API with anything else that I might want to pipe that data to. And one thing that's really nice about it is that if you are just a single person who is interested in trying it out, they have a very high just individual user limit of about 10,000 interactions with Pipedream before they would start asking you to buy one of their priced models or one of their paid models. And so far, the documentation's been pretty good. The experience is nice. The interface is pretty straightforward and easy to get started with. So it's pretty neat. And it's got what looks like a ton of integrations with all sorts of popular platforms like Twilio and Discourse, Google Analytics, a whole bunch of them. You just start typing one in and it'll show you everything that might match up with what you're searching for. So it's pretty cool. And I would say if you need to connect some APIs in a programmatic fashion, this might be a good one to check out.
Awesome. Jack, do you have any picks?
I'm going to play proud dad today. My daughter got onto a Valorant team called the Gun Gals. So I'm just going to go and plug them. I'd love to see women in gaming. So I think it's great. And I'm just so glad that, she's out there and having fun and also making friends doing this Valorant stuff. And honestly, when I've seen the all women's tournaments and heard them talk and chat, it's just so positive and so friendly and fun. I think it's great to see. So Gun Gals.
Awesome. I'm actually going to keep the gaming theme going. I'm going to pick a game called Pokemon Unite, which is a new game for the Switch. It's kind of similar in that it's a 5-on-5 game. So it's a team-based game. It's similar to games like League of Legends, but it's a lot more approachable, being like the Pokemon brand and such. So if you're typically awful at those sorts of games like I am, it's a good choice just as it's pretty beginner friendly. I've been playing with my kids and we've been having fun with it. So if you're a fan of games like that, or if you've been, I guess, intimidated by games like that and are looking for like an easy entry point, Pokemon Unite's pretty cool to check out. And Evyatar, what picks do you have for us?
So I recently bought a nice little software called Run.js. I think it's on runjs.dev. It's a small utility that serves like a desktop app or a desktop code console for JavaScript. You can install NPM packages onto it. It runs TypeScript and it shows you on the right-hand side of the website of the application the result of everything you're doing. And if you just want to test stuff as you work or as you try it out and to see the results, it just works magically and very fast. It is similar to how you would work with a sandbox, but it's just for a console, and it's really quick and it works amazing. So this is something I really recommend.
Very cool. You might also want to check out Quokka and Wallaby, which sort of do the similar sort of thing in the VS Code context. You can create like a worksheet and then just go for it.
Quokka sounds made up. It's
an Australian thing.
It's pretty cool.
You use Quokka? It's really fun.
One of these times I am, like, especially in the JavaScript world, my pick is just going to be totally made up. And I'm just going to deliver it with a very straight face. And I'm going to wait to see if anybody calls me out on it.
Oh, you just have to you go make a made up site that's like, ha, or like they get rickrolled,
Yeah.
Yes.
Make the homepage look right, but like the button rickrolls you, sort of like the get started now sort of thing gets, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Well, Evyatar, This has been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot about Vest. My last question for you is, for people that are interested and want to learn more, what's the best place to follow you, to learn more about Vest? Where's the best place to send people?
So they can find me on Twitter. Even though I'm not very active there, they can always send me a message or shout at me. I'm always reading my notification, and it's on at Alush Evyatar in Twitter, and it'll probably be in the show notes. And otherwise, they can go to vestjs.dev, which has all the documentations, a link to the GitHub page.
Awesome.
Awesome stuff. Well, thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate it. Learned a lot about Vest and other things. And thanks everybody for joining us. And until next week.
See you later.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.